A lot of times when a couple is facing a sexual function challenge for one or both partners, there is a tendency to immediately think we're alone. This shouldn't be happening this way. It should be working. Recognize that all couples have challenges.
Welcome to the Get Your Marriage On podcast. I'm your host, Dan Purcell, a Christian marriage and intimacy expert and coach. I'm on a mission to help couples have the best sex and most emotionally intimate marriages possible. Our episodes cover topics you've always wondered about and are packed with practical advice designed to help you take your marriage to the next level. Welcome to the Get Your Marriage On podcast. I have a form on my website where you can send me your most private questions anonymously, and I'll do my best to address them on this podcast and future episodes. Although there's quite a variety in the questions I receive, and I love all the questions you do send, I do get asked frequently about what to do when you or your husband comes too quickly during sex or has premature ejaculation. I wanted to do an in-depth episode on this topic to address the many questions that we have, because frankly, sex isn't that enjoyable when it's over too quick or you just don't last as long as you'd like to last. Even if this is something you don't deal with right now in your marriage, I'm sure that the information in this episode will give you insights on how to keep your sexual health in tip-top shape for your marriage. My guest today is Mark Goldberg. He is a sex therapist out of Maryland that specializes in common male sexual dysfunction issues, such as premature ejaculation. We connected a few months back, and I'm impressed with how knowledgeable he is on this subject. But that's not it. I sense right away how passionate he is in helping couples enjoy an optimal sex life that brings joy to the relationship. We have a tradition on this podcast where I get to read a review. Here's a recent review I got. Dan knows his topic, and I love the way he honors his wife as he shares, as well as facilitates a comfortable environment for guests to talk and discuss some of the most important and least discussed marriage topics. Awesome show. Thanks for that review, and that's absolutely right. This is such an important, very vital part of our marriage and key to a lot of our happiness in life. Yet, it's something not discussed very much, or if it is discussed, it's not discussed in a positive light. So thank you for that review. If you'll take a moment to leave a review on Apple Podcasts, and if you hear me read your review on the air, email me at support@getyourmarriageon.com, and I will personally mail you a gift to say thank you for leaving that review. In a few weeks, on July 12 to 13, we're hosting a virtual lovemaking retreat. This is perfect for couples that want to have a little getaway, that want to experience something new and do something sexually wonderful in their marriage. This is where you get to join Emily and I live. You can join us from either a hotel room or send the kids to grandma's house so you have your home to yourself. And we'll meet live Friday night, Saturday morning, and Saturday night. And we will guide you through a step-by-step practice that will be unforgettable. You won't want to miss this. More details are on our website at getyourmarriageon.com. And it's coming soon, so be sure to register today. And in October, we're hosting our next in-person marriage retreat. This is ideal for couples that are in an otherwise happy marriage, but wish things were better in the intimacy department. Our retreats are absolutely not boring and not like anything else out there. It's not in a stuffy conference room at a hotel. Our retreats are in a beautiful resort where you're surrounded by nature and red rock and canyons and starry skies at night. This is also a time for you and your spouse not only to enjoy some romance, but to do a really deep dive into the intimacy of your marriage relationship. I know some of you would rather eat your toenails than travel to a new place to talk about the most private and perhaps frustrating aspect of your marriage, but I promise you that this is a safe environment. But you don't have to take my word for it. Check out one of our many interviews of couples that have been to the retreats. They talk about their experience. You can find all this on my website. Go to getyourmarriageon.com and click retreats. And now let's talk about premature ejaculation. Mark, it's a pleasure to have you on the Get Your Marriage On podcast today. How are you?
I am great. Thank you very much for having me on, Dan.
I'm looking forward to our conversation today. We're talking about premature ejaculation. And I saw a cartoon once. There's an empty room with chairs set up, and in the comic, the woman is vacuuming as if preparing for a meeting, like an Alcoholics Anonymous type of a meeting. And the door opens, and there's a man that pokes his head in. And the woman says to him, well, if you've come to the Premature Ejaculators Anonymous meeting, you've come too early. I just found it funny because, yeah, that's what we're talking about. People that come too early. So
Yes, yes, yes. Definitely play on words, but pretty significant challenge for a wide range of the population.
that's right. And I want to approach this conversation with a lot of compassion because this is distressing. It's a real tough issue that a lot of people face, and a lot of men face, and they wish they didn't have this. And I get a lot of emails about it. So I've searched and I found you. Can you tell me a little about what you do in your clinic, a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, my name is Mark Goldberg. I am a licensed clinical marriage and family therapist in the state of Maryland, and I am a certified sex therapist. I work alongside six other colleagues here in Maryland. We have two offices, one located in the Baltimore area and another one located in the Montgomery County, probably more commonly known as the northern suburbs of Washington, D.C. And we specialize in working with individuals and couples around both emotional and physical intimacy, including treatment of psychogenic erectile dysfunction, ejaculatory concerns like premature ejaculation, and whatnot.
Awesome. Very good. Very good. First of all, how common is premature ejaculation?
So, and when we talk about these numbers, it's hard to know.
Because it's subjective, right? Part of
It's
it's subjective. But
Yeah, so the definition of premature ejaculation is a little bit difficult to pin down. And the reporting of premature ejaculation is also a bit difficult to pin down.
right.
But the estimates, I think the accepted estimates range that premature ejaculation will impact about 25 to 30% of the population, of the male population, over the lifespan. Okay. That number can be a bit confusing, though, because that includes men who are reporting rapid ejaculation when they are just at the onset of sexual activity, which, is somewhat common. But it also doesn't account so much for people who are not reporting this in the first place. So the numbers are a little bit difficult to wrap one's head around, but we do know that it is quite a common concern and quite a common complaint.
I gotcha. Yeah, definitely of the male sexual functioning concerns, premature ejaculation is right up there with erectile dysfunction, I would imagine.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So are there different categories or, I guess, flavors of premature ejaculation?
So that's a great question. The answer is yes. There are different ways to break down subtypes of premature ejaculation. Happy to share with your listeners how I think about this, and hopefully that'll be a helpful way for them to think about what premature ejaculation is or can be. The first distinction that I draw is whether premature ejaculation is a lifelong concern or whether there was a later onset of premature ejaculation, also known as an acquired premature ejaculation. So within each of those categories, there are men who will report variability with their premature ejaculation. So some men report that it's happening all the time since onset or their entire lives. Other men are reporting that it's happening 25%, 30%, 50%. The key element, though, is that it is distressing, and in many instances, it is interfering with a relationship. The other category, which could apply both to lifelong and acquired premature ejaculation, is subjective PE, subjective premature ejaculation. So we in this field have developed some definitions, but they are, again, there's some fluidity with those definitions, but we call it, say, objective premature ejaculation, somewhere in the range of 1 minute to 3 minutes, depending on who you are asking and depending on the type of sexual activity. So I know that this is not very concrete.
Right, right.
But
Uh-huh.
what would be helpful is that men who are experiencing ejaculation after 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 7 minutes into sexual activity would, if they are distressed by this, this would fall into the category of subjective premature ejaculation. This would be outside of the bounds of something which is objective. That could be lifelong, that could be acquired. The key points, again, is that it is distressing. Oftentimes it's interfering with the relationship. And the other definition that we use is premature ejaculation is hallmarked by a sense of lack of control over the ejaculatory process. So we're really
Yes.
looking for those hallmarks in premature ejaculation.
Yeah, yeah. So, like, if usually in our typical sexual script in my marriage, it's about 5, 10 minutes in, when I finally ejaculate. But lately it's been 2 minutes or so, and I don't feel like I have a lot of control over it. It just happens, and it's like wah wah. It's not great, and it's over. That would be really distressing. And that's what we're talking about here. It's kind of subjective because you could be in another relationship where 2 minutes is great. No one's complaining. It's fantastic for them. It's not an issue to them. Whereas in other relationships, it might be like she might be saying, "How come you can't last longer? How come it's over too quick? This isn't good for me." And now he feels really responsible for not providing a great experience for both of them in that sexual experience. So it can be subjective in that way.
Yeah, so I think you're raising a really important point that when we talk about subjective PE as a category, a lot of that does have to do with both the man and his partner. So like you're pointing out, like the partners make a big difference in this equation. So some couples, they develop their script and 2 minutes is more than enough. For
Right.
other couples, their script requires 45 minutes. So one person's 2 minutes is perfect. The other person's 2 minutes is completely distressing. Both do not have premature ejaculation as far as we are clinically concerned, but both are ejaculating at the same point in their sexual sequence.
Right. Yeah. So, Mark, let's talk about why it happens. And I'm assuming there's a physical component and a psychological component to both of these. Why does it happen?
So this is also a great question. And the truth is we don't know enough about premature ejaculation or really about all the factors that go into the ejaculatory process to comprehensively answer this question. So I'll share with the listeners what I know. I'm sure there are people out there that do
Uh-huh.
know more about this, but
Well, before you say that, it makes
yeah,
sense. You wouldn't know all because it's complex, first of all.
so complex. It's multifactorial, and
Right.
like a lot of times, and again, I fully understand this. When people are distressed about sexual function or sexual dysfunction, they
Mhm.
want an answer.
Yes.
They want like a single answer.
Right, right.
Unfortunately, this is multifactorial. It's very hard to get to a singular answer. Okay. So on the physical side, one of the key components that I think we've come to learn or understand is the role of serotonin and oxytocin in the ejaculatory process. And this is seen most commonly when people take medications like SSRIs. They are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors,
Mhm.
which the intention is to increase the level of serotonin in the brain, but also subsequently in the body.
Mhm.
And one of the side effects oftentimes is trouble achieving orgasm and delayed or anejaculation. So, what we have come to learn is that serotonin does play a big role in regulating the ejaculatory process, and increasing those levels for, at least for some people, would seem to delay or slow down the ejaculatory process. SSRIs are used as a off-label intervention for premature ejaculation. Now, we were saying before about the different categories. So, when we're talking about the biological factors, this is most commonly seen in lifelong premature ejaculation and a
Mhm.
premature ejaculation that is going to be experienced across multiple settings. That's another piece that I didn't mention previously, but not all sexual activity is the same.
Right.
And the
Like, what do you
more
mean by that?
what I mean by that is there are people that will ejaculate prematurely with, let's say, penetrative sex with a partner,
Uh-huh.
but with another form of sex, oral sex, manual stimulation, solo sexual activity like masturbation. They may have an ejaculatory latency period, or the time it takes between stimulation and ejaculation, that could be 10, 15, 20 minutes. So there's variability with that. The more ubiquitous the experience is, across settings, the more likely it is to have biological components that are the primary drivers,
Ah,
because the
that
body
makes sense.
oftentimes can't distinguish, right? So if it's a serotonin issue, it should not make a huge difference between different types of stimulation. Again, it is complex and multifactorial. So the signals that go up from the point of stimulation to the brain and back down will be different to some degree with different forms of stimulation. But again, the more ubiquitous it is, the more likely it is to be biological. The more variation we see, the higher the likelihood is that psychological factors are in play.
That makes perfect sense. Right, right. Okay, so we know serotonin plays a role in that. How about any studies on whether it's hereditary? There's like if your father was a premature ejaculator, you're likely to be a premature ejaculator yourself or anything like that?
There are some studies, but what I have come across has been, I would say, a little bit more in the anecdotal category,
Okay.
because a lot of times we don't have multi-generations in front of us, and because it is a newer phenomenon that people are more open and talking about these things, a lot of times we don't know what was going on in previous generations. Um,
That's true. Because can you imagine sitting down, hey, Dad, are you a premature ejaculator too? Right? You don't
Correct,
have
right?
those conversations with your
Right.
dad.
So again, maybe in
Uh,
2050, like, we'll be able to have better, like, more
uh-huh.
information about that. But
Right, right.
again, with the role of serotonin, so we do notice that those, like, serotonin levels do have more of a hereditary or a genetic element to it. And there is anecdotal pieces out there that would indicate that, again, you are at a higher likelihood to ejaculate more rapidly or prematurely if that was something in the family line.
Gotcha. All right. Of all the people you treat, just guesstimate, how much of it is maybe just purely a physical reason why they're a premature ejaculator versus psychological?
That is a great question. We try to get it to be 0 to 100, because if it is physical, we understand that that is somewhat out of our purview in terms of being able to effectively treat. Now,
Uh-huh.
in terms of management, right, or coping with this, or setting up one's relationship for maximum success, if you have a biologically driven PE, that's a little bit of a different story. So we try to, like, work over in our practice as sequentially as we can, which is, let's first see what we can do to move the needle on your ejaculatory latency time. And if we can't do that, then we would kind of go for the bigger structural changes to a relationship or how sexual activity works.
I'm not a clinician like you, but I would assume the bigger chunk of it is more what's going on psychologically and in the nervous system that's causing the premature ejaculation.
So I think I tend to see those cases. I would say that much. But
Uh-huh.
again, some of that might be because there is a selection bias that the people who
Yes.
are reaching out are already under the impression or have reason to believe that there is a psychological component. Like we mentioned, if 25% of the population is experiencing this,
Uh-huh.
I'm only getting a very, very, very small sliver. So, like, the
That's right.
people who I see, I recognize that that might be of a particular sample selection bias just by virtue of who's coming to see us.
Is there a story you can share of a couple that came to see you or a person came to see you where there was a psychological component? What was it like? What was the distress? What was going through their mind and how they were able to overcome that?
Okay, so I certainly can if it's okay with you. I would just want to take a step back
Oh, yeah, yeah.
here for a moment and just mention, so premature ejaculation runs, like, on the psychological or the psychosexual um perspective, I think runs along two main lines. One of them is distress, anxiety, worry, concern.
Uh-huh.
The other one is in the excitation camp, which is an overexcitation.
Ah.
So I think it's important, like, for your listeners to recognize that there could be different driving factors that really are in opposite directions. And again, for reasons that I don't think are well understood at this
Mhm.
time, either direction could be a contributing factor to premature ejaculation.
I've personally experienced both. So,
Okay,
yeah, I know what you're talking
there you
about.
go.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Way too excited here and then boom, or I'm really stressed out or whatever, and then boom. So, yeah.
Yes. 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 And again, they would have different psychological profiles.
Mhm.
An interesting question, just as a side note, would be if there is maybe a genetic predisposition, so that either of those factors could drive or cause premature ejaculation at higher rates with that person because they're predisposed.
Mhm.
But in any case, a lot of times it does primarily go down one of these two lines.
Great. Gotcha.
Now, yeah, in
So,
terms of an
yeah,
anecdote or
yeah. That's good. So, I got an email from a man where sex is infrequent. And when it does happen, I think he's just so excited. But also, he's in a relationship where he knows his wife doesn't really want to participate in sex. She's throwing him a bone. It's not a great, healthy sexual relationship, in my opinion. So the whole time he's thinking, she's not liking this, she's not enjoying this. I needed to get it over and done with because he feels a lot of pressure from her to be quick and move on, right? And so he's really developed this habit of premature ejaculation in that. And then his wife beats him over the head, like, how come you come too soon? How come you didn't last long enough and whatever? So there's like this, it's really complex relationship issue that's happening. And then he's like, help me with my premature ejaculation. How do you help couples like that?
That is a great question, and I appreciate that you said couples. This probably more of a couples
Definitely.
issue than it is an individual issue. So we would go through a proper individual assessment because sometimes the story we're getting is not, whole and complete.
Uh-huh.
But assuming that that would be the case in what you are describing, so this again would sound to me like a little bit more down the anxiety road. I understand that because sex is,
Yeah.
is far between, there is an excitation factor, but it also sounds again like there's an angst, a worry. This person is on guard, waiting for negative feedback from their partner, whether it takes too long or too short.
Uh-huh.
It's a very anxiety provoking situation. And I think one of the prevalent theories that exists, already back 100 years ago, but I think has taken on a more evolved and developed approach is that ejaculating early is an exit strategy to be out of a tense or an anxious or anxiety provoking situation. So we see this also commonly with men who initially experience erectile dysfunction and oftentimes will develop a premature ejaculation as an exit strategy so they can avoid experiencing loss of erection midstream. And even though that is distressing and it's a distressing outcome from a psychological perspective, it could be preferred to like the primary initial trigger of losing an erection. So again, in the case that you're describing, I could imagine that as an exit strategy, right, the body's like sensing the distress. A lot of times men in that position are taking the temperature of their partner.
Mhm.
They're watching for facial cues. This can become really, really distressing. And, the subconscious can say, like, let's get out of here. And
Right.
ejaculating rapidly is a way of being able to exit that situation.
Yeah, yeah. All right. A lot of deep work needed there.
Yeah.
What if it's more on the excitation? Like, oh, I'm just way too excited. How do you work with couples on that side or individuals on that side?
So that's a great question. I'm thinking about like a phenomenon or a case that and it's not just one, but like something I've come to be much more aware and ask a lot more about is, and this is particularly interesting with acquired PE in men who are, let's say, in their 40s or 50s, where it really seems to come out of left field.
Uh
So
huh.
while in very rare instances there could be a medical cause of that, I have not come across that. I'm always referring people to make sure they're seen and cleared medically. What I have come to see as like one fascinating or interesting phenomenon is as partners change in their sexual response, which does happen in particular in like heterosexual couples, female sexual response is something that can change and evolve over time.
Hmm.
And some women, like as they age and approach menopause or going through menopause, may see a reduction in responsiveness. Other women have have the opposite experience. So, been more than a couple cases that have come my direction where it took us a little while to figure it out, but a partner that usually wouldn't start responding until 10, 15 minutes into the experience has gone through some of their own physiological and psychological changes and was responding after like 15, 20, 30 seconds.
Uh huh.
And as we lined up experiences like through sequencing, it became clear that the excitation factor had a lot to do with partner response.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So she's coming a lot faster than she used to.
Right.
She's older. She's, if I can say the word, hornier, right? It's just with the changes going on. And that's contributing to his excitation
Correct, correct, right, and,
tremendously.
like, and
Too quick.
exactly, and, like, things can shift in terms of audible expression, like, all sorts of triggers and whatnot, and, like, these details can end up making a very big difference in the experience, so, once somebody is aware of that, they have a lot more at their fingertips, 1, to take that awareness with them into,
The
like, the
encounter.
situation or
Uh
into
huh.
the encounter, and number 2, to be able to communicate with a partner about that, like, "Oh, this is what's going on. It's not like this is not meant to be offensive. I'm just really turned on by you."
Right.
I just didn't realize what was going on.
Uh-huh.
Right. So like
Right.
maybe we switch up the kind of stimulation when we introduce that stimulation. We kind of mix things up a little bit so we can better manage this. So again, as a very basic surface level type of intervention, I've seen that to be effective for some of these people.
That's good. All right. So, what are some practical solutions if you are a premature ejaculator? Like, I've read the book by Dr. Ian Kerner, and he's been a guest on our podcast before. She Comes First. And he mentions in his introduction that he was a premature ejaculator. He was so embarrassed about it. That's where he really honed in his ability to stimulate women orally. And then he wrote a whole book on it. So,
Yes.
because
So
he
yeah,
delayed penetration by really focusing on
focusing on the
oral
partner.
sex. Yeah, right.
Yes. So I think his book kind of speaks to, and I was talking about like how like we try to work sequentially, which is anything we can do to extend or help extend ejaculatory latency time, we do. But not all people who experience premature ejaculation are responsive, at least to the level and depth of treatment that we can currently offer for this. So I'm always optimistic and hopeful that we get better at this work and the medical community gets better with their developed intervention. So I say that like for now, when we are not able to help extend that ejaculatory latency time, adjusting how sexual activity happens is a big part of that. So I look at Ian Kerner's book and how he approached that as much more in that adjustment type of phase, which is
Yes.
having to like restructure those sexual scripts. And She Comes First is a great example of that.
Cool, cool. Any other adjustments or practical things people can do?
Yeah. So if you scour the internet, which a lot of men do when experience premature ejaculation, stop start method is one of the more popular ways to try to gain like behavioral control. And
Yes.
that's really premised on what we were talking about before when like younger men who have not mastered that sense of control. And again, premature ejaculation for a longer while, I think, was viewed a lot more through this lens
Mhm.
for a number of like sociological reasons that I'm not going to dive into at the moment.
Uh-huh.
But it was, I think, viewed much more as a younger man's condition. And
Yeah.
it was primarily viewed as a sexual skills deficit issue and having to learn how to gain control. So, stop start method was one of the more popular approaches. And I think for a fair amount of people, can be an effective treatment to learn where that line of ejaculatory inevitability actually is and how to control and temper that and moderate that. So that's something that I suggest to even when people call us and they have that, I suggest they try that first before sitting down with us to see if that gives them any yield. Again, if it's deeper biological factors going on like serotonin issues and whatnot, I think the yield on these interventions is limited. But at the same time, because this is primarily experienced in younger men, and a lot of times I think it can be that deficit,
Uh-huh.
stop start is it's a great method. The other, quick tip I would give is before you go to speak to somebody, sequence your experiences for yourself. Take good notes. The answer to whatever's going on, if we can be of help to you, is going to be in those details. So you're either going to get them before you come in and you can
Uh-huh.
start to see some of your own patterns, or you're going to start with a therapist like myself or somebody else who does this work, and we're going to need that information because without those details, it's hard to really map out a proper premature ejaculation profile, both from a tactile and stimulation standpoint and from a psychological standpoint. So we need like to have a history. We need to have some samples, not physical samples, but we
No.
need to have samples that we can look at in these experiences so
Uh-huh.
we can start to develop like more of a working theory and get our interventions more tailored for what's going on. So sequencing is really, really important.
I could just imagine a person coming in with a notebook full of logs. Start, 15 seconds, this happened, 30 seconds, this
Yes. So I have worked with some men who have done that, which I will say is helpful. But I also remind people that we also need you to be in the experience.
I know, right?
So yeah, it's like I remind people like I don't need you to take notes in the moment. It should be retrospective. And like when you're in it, just be in it. Don't be overthinking it. Don't use a stopwatch. Just guess, right? Because again, we don't want people to become overly clinical and analytical. It really is meant to be a connecting, enjoyable, pleasurable experience. And the analysis, I think, detracts from that.
For some people that don't know what the stop-start method is, can you describe that in layman
Yes.
terms?
Yes. So there are different variations of this, but generally speaking, a man will bring himself to erection. And the way we try to describe this is if we assume that that point of ejaculatory inevitability is at a 10, then we encourage men to bring themselves up like close to it. Start getting close to a 10, 8.5, and 9. Again, it's all subjective.
Yeah.
Um,
Uh-huh.
but trying to learn where that is, and as they're approaching it, they let things kind of cool down and cool off, and then they start that back up. Generally, I think the recommendation is to do that for 3 rounds and then to ejaculate. And the idea here is to, like, again, develop that skill of control and being able to understand what the sensations are leading up to that point. The ejaculatory inevitability is also what we call in layman's terms the point of no return.
Yeah.
So that's what the emission has started in the body, which is going to trigger basically an automated impulse to ejaculation. So that point of ejaculatory inevitability is what we're trying to learn how to control, like, when approaching it, being able to kind of regulate the level of stimulation, whether that's physical or mental.
Yes. This is a great skill for any man to have, right? Learn more ejaculatory control, just your arousal. It's about tuning in and just really understanding where you are at your arousal process in that. That's a great skill to have.
Yes, I will mention though, because I have encountered a number of men who describe basically going from 0 to 60, even in this exercise. And I want to just acknowledge that I don't want to make this sound overly simple. There's a lot of
Right.
complexity and a lot of variability from person to person. So this is really like much more of a rudimentary or like an elementary type of intervention that is going to help some people and it's going to set them on a much better path. But I want to acknowledge this is not going to work for everybody. There are intricacies and complexities in the ejaculatory process that do not apply to everybody in the same way.
There's also things you can do like reduce sensation. There's products out there that are like numbing sprays. You can use a thicker condom to reduce sensation. A lot of men don't like those solutions because it doesn't make the experience as fun, but there are products like that too that are practical if you want to go that route, right?
Yeah, so there are numbing products on the market. There also are condoms that come in, varying degrees of thickness that can reduce sensation. I think I'm going to put a word of caution out there from my perspective. There is something about using these products that I think is overly performative and not very pleasure driven. So if your way of approaching this is to eliminate total sensation or near total sensation in the penis in an effort to delay this for your partner, ostensibly, like there is some limitation in that sexual connection because it really is only about the other person's pleasure. And like from a physiological standpoint, you've eliminated your ability to physically enjoy that. So there's some limitation in terms of what your partner can give back to you. So I understand that there are situations and circumstances where this is a good, appropriate, correct intervention for this person or for that couple. But I just want to give that word of caution that it doesn't come without implications for a sexual connection, for a relationship, and for I think what can oftentimes start or exacerbate a performance focus and really like a pretty significant limitation on the pleasurable aspects of sex.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because sex isn't a performance, or it shouldn't. I don't know. Some couples do approach it that way, but I do see a lot of it's short-sighted when it's just about a performance. Let's look at the bigger picture here. This is about a couple coming together. This is about creating a stronger bond or having fun or whatever their ultimate goal is through this sexual experience, right? That's what we're talking about here.
Exactly. And again, I want
Uh-huh.
to, again, it's a word of caution, which is I think people have to just be thoughtful and intentional. So, like, I get that every human being is designed uniquely. And I've encountered it. I'm sure anybody who works with couples and sex encounters it. Sometimes penetrative sex is a really important experience for, like, let's say the female partner.
Yeah.
And Like this oftentimes can be a good solution for that couple.
Mhm.
Okay. However, like if you're going to use that every time, like got to just be thinking about like what is the impact? Like, do we recommend or suggest maybe the couple does this like every other, right? So it's like one is more focused on my pleasure, one is more focused on your pleasure. So we keep
Right.
some mutuality, some connection. So I think a lot of men who tend to become very performative, generally speaking, would look at this product and would just go ahead and use it every time.
Right.
But I think over time that could have detrimental effects on them individually and on the relationship.
Right. So whatever you do, collaborate as a couple, work together on this.
Collaborate and be thoughtful.
Yes, and generous. All right. What advice for couples that have tried all the things and there hasn't been a lot of improvement? It's just more about coping. What are any stories of couples that have just learned how to adapt to this and integrate it and make it just part of their lives and thrive in that?
I'm going to take a moment to kind of like just make sure I'm working through the correct sequence. In other words, that they have gone through efforts to extend ejaculatory latency time to no
Yes.
avail.
Uh
They've
huh.
adjusted some of their sexual scripts, but it's not satisfying, or it's
Yep.
not. Is that the situation
Yeah.
that you're
And
describing?
they just come to recognize this just is. They're going to have to deal with this.
Okay, so
This is more
number
like
one,
counseling the couple now.
we're counseling the couple. We're saying this is your situation. Ejaculation is going to occur from the onset of stimulation, X amount of time, 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, and now we have to just deal with this and cope.
Yeah. Hmm.
Okay. So again, each couple is going to be different with this. I want to acknowledge that, and the
Yeah.
impact is going to be different. What it means to him, what it means to the partner, how they're interpreting all of that, and whatnot. So number one, I would say is that like sex is hard. I mean, it's very
Yes.
fun, it's very gratifying, it's very connecting, but it's hard. Like
Yes.
very few couples just we just magically connect and it's all good. And he knows exactly what works for her. Nope, nobody said a word, and vice versa.
Uh
Like
huh.
that's a very rare, if non-existent at all, situation. So I think it's important because a lot of times when a couple is facing a sexual function challenge for one or both partners, there is a tendency like to immediately think we're alone. This shouldn't be happening this way. It should be working. And there's an idealized version of how sex should go, which I think oftentimes deviates from reality.
Yeah.
So I think for one, recognizing that like all couples have challenges. All couples are gonna, face things, whether it's in the actual function side or whether that's in communicating about sex, frequency, desires, communicating these things. It's hard. It's hard. It's vulnerable. It's difficult. Most, if not all couples, have to learn to adjust to each other over time, and they have to learn to develop some flexibility in their sexual scripts. Okay.
Right.
If you happen to be one of those lucky couples, one, congratulations. Okay. Number
Uh,
two, probably not going to stay that way over the lifespan because the physical body changes, the brain evolves, the brain changes, we acclimate to stimulation, things just change. Very few things stay static. So even if you happen to be one of those lucky couples, or yeah, you have a buddy or a friend or a relative who seems to indicate that everything was just perfect and always is and always will be.
uh-huh.
Just know it's not. It's probably not reality, and it certainly
Uh-huh.
is not going to stay that way if people happen to be in a really good spot. It takes work. So this is
Uh-huh.
just your form of work. So I think number one, getting bearing straight about that is really, really important. Number two, as I mentioned this was briefly before, is being open to developing some flexibility in your sexual script. The less rigid people are, the easier it is to overcome these things, and the easier it is to learn how to be satisfied. And I don't mean how to settle. I mean genuinely how to be satisfied. If anybody walks around disappointed with the outcomes of life because they had an expectation and were not willing to adjust to any changes in reality, they're going to be dissatisfied. I think people who tend to be more satisfied are the ones who say, yeah, of course, in an ideal world, it would have come out that way, but I have to play the field where it is. It's not a bad field. It's not a
Right.
bad field, right? And if I can like learn how to like make this satisfying and change the story I'm telling myself, I think a lot more opportunity and a lot more satisfaction ends up occurring for individuals and couples.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so glad you mentioned this, the flexibility, how important that is. That applies to so many things about life too, right? with the challenges we have in life.
A
Can you
a
be
100%.
flexible to adjust to what's getting thrown at you in life? There's a couple that my colleague worked with where she insisted that she only has her orgasms from penetrative sex. But a few minutes in, he'd ejaculate because she'd get excited and I'd get him excited. And it would be over for him. And she was kind of mean to him. And he just said, "Can we please use a sex toy, or can we please try oral sex? Can we use these other things?" She said, "Well, all those the other things feel good. I only really like your penis in me. That's the only way I really want to come." And it just put an enormous amount of performance pressure on him.
Mhm.
And sex became mechanical for him, and she can sense it's mechanical for him, and she doesn't want that, right? She wants to be made love to, not a machine. And so the pendulum swings the other way, and it's like you're not good at, you're not doing this. Like there's just so much,
Yes.
and
Yes,
they're not
I'm with you.
flexible.
If the script is, I need you to be fully into this and it's driven by you, but I also need you to do it the way I need, as long as I need it for. And parenthetically, we're not talking about the other side of all of this, which is men who are lasting longer, a lot of times are overshooting, right? It's not like there's like a magical switch. When we talk about control, right, there is an element where there, at some point, there's a loss of control.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
not
Uh-huh.
right. It's not as if like for 99% of guys, it's not as if they're saying, oh, now is the right time. Okay, now I'll
Go.
release. Right?
Uh-huh.
Exactly. It doesn't work that way.
uh,
So what I mean is that of course you need flexibility in these scripts, no matter what. So the more rigid the sexual scripts are,
no pun
uh,
intended. Yes. Uh-huh.
yeah, we could do another episode on
All
ED.
the puns,
But
yeah. I
yes,
think we will. All right.
yes. But the more flexibility that people have in those scripts, I think the more likely they are to be satisfied with whatever their circumstances are.
I'm glad we're having this conversation. All right, Mark. Let's say you're a couple, you've worked through these issues, you're making some progress, and now you're ready to take your sex life to the next level. What would be your black belt sex tips?
The more I do this work and the more people that I meet over time, the
Uh-huh.
more I realize how different and unique each person is and how different and unique each couples are. And I find it harder and harder to give broader stroke tips. I'll just say that.
Uh-huh. Another
Um,
pun. Great. Uh-huh.
they're unavoidable. They really are unavoidable.
Right.
What I would say is, and again, this definitely speaks to people who are in long-term relationships, is don't get too complacent. If things are working really well in the beginning, that's great. And I wish you like years and years of happiness and bliss. What I also know is that many couples do not communicate about what's working and only start to have conversations once something like goes off the tracks for them, which is inevitable, I believe. It's going to
Uh-huh.
happen for
Right.
everybody.
Uh-huh.
But then they're doing a lot of like retro work, trying to figure out what happened, why did things go off track. I don't know if you work with any couples directly, or to what degree, but I cannot tell you how many couples I've encountered that are married for decades. And I'm the first person who ever asked them, even between themselves, like, well, how did you come to develop that script? Like what happened? Did you, they're like, we never spoke about it. We've been having sex for 30 plus years.
Uh-huh.
And we know this is not like that communication piece, I think, is really, really big. And I think that's a big part of where couples intimacy comes from, is like sharing like these vulnerable elements, whether they are individually driven, whether they're couple driven, really being able to communicate about like sexual wants, needs, preferences, fears, worries, concerns, I believe is something that will go with couples over the lifespan. And I think that'll be the most protective element that a couple can have when inevitably life is going to throw curveballs, the human body is going to throw curveballs, the relationship is going to throw curveballs. You're prepared and ready to talk about that and collaborate around that as a team.
I love that. That's excellent. If people want to look you up, learn more about what you do, what's the best place for them to go?
I would send people to erectioniq.com. That is a website that we developed here in the practice, primarily for psychogenic erectile dysfunction, but we do cover a lot of physical issues in the ED space, as well as articles, podcasts, and resources for ejaculatory conditions. And if anybody wants to speak with me, there's a way to schedule a consult just to kind of talk through whatever is going on. We try to provide as many resources as we can to help people work towards resolution and also manage these conditions.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you're interested in accelerating growth in your marriage, either sexually, emotionally, or spiritually, I want to invite you to work with me in my affordable coaching program called Next Level. More information about Next Level and my fun and sexy apps for couples are available at getyourmarriageon.com. Please also don't forget to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss a single episode. And be sure to tell your married friends. I promise, they will thank you for life. Now go get your marriage on.